Hi, this is Elizabeth Blandon. I'm here on behalf of the Blandon Law Team, and we're going to talk about asylum, especially people who have a pending asylum case and their situation in their country is getting better. So if you know anybody, we're going to be going live and we can take questions. Last week we did this in Spanish. This week we're doing it in English. Hello to all of you who are joining us now. So if you have a case of asylum that's pending at immigration or even pending in front of an immigration judge and the situation in your country is getting better, I congratulate you, because what better thing than to have a situation in your country getting better? After all, people who apply for asylum, I always say it's not that you want to be in the United States, it's that you really have no other choice. You don't want to be here, but sometimes, not that it's not the greatest country, but after all, sometimes where you really want to be is back in your home country with your family, your friends, and everything you've ever known and loved. I mean, that was the way that I was raised. I remember I was raised hearing almost every day that my family was going to go back to Cuba someday. Here we are 50 years later, and we are not back in Cuba. Although it is the best country on the planet, I'm very grateful to it. That is generally the asylum mentality, okay? So let me just talk today about two things. If you have a currently pending asylum case and the situation in your country is getting better. This is happening with people who are, for example, from Venezuela. We have some clients from Venezuela, but it's happening in other countries as well. And so let me talk, first I'm going to talk about the exciting law, which is always a lot of fun, and then I'm going to talk about the reality, which is a little bit different than what the law is. Now, the law is easy to find. It's there in black and white. And if you want the actual statute, you can look it up in 8 CFR 208, meaning 8 Code of Federal Regulations 208. It explains exactly what you need to win asylum, which means that a year later you get a green card for yourself and your family member, your spouse, and all children under 21 years of age who are not married. And then you can apply for a green card a year later, and 5 years after that, you become a citizen of the U.S. as if you had been born here. So that's the law. And the law says that if there are several ways to win asylum. That's one of the interesting things about it. It's not just one straight way. People sometimes have this strange belief that the only way you can win asylum is if you were shot at in your home country and you were shot at because of your political opinion. Well, first of all, there are people that we've won asylum for, and I don't even know what their political opinion is. I don't even need to ask. And why is that? Because you can win asylum based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. And we're not even going to get into what membership in a particular social group is, but it's enough for you to understand that political opinion is not the only way to get asylum. So, if you have been harmed in the past, and by harmed, I mean significant harm. I mean you have been shot at or other really nasty things. I'm not talking about being harassed. I'm not talking about having someone say names or just bother you. I am talking about specifically being harmed in the past because of one of these 5 things that are called protected grounds, or you have a reasonable fear that it will happen in the future, and that's the key, a reasonable fear that it'll happen in the future. Then you will get asylum. That's the law. And I pause there for dramatic effect, because that's not the reality. What happens when someone has a case and they're asking for asylum and they have a fear that if they go back to their country, they're going to be harmed again, say for their political opinion, just to make it easier, right? But the situation in their country is getting better. Well, the law actually says that it is not your burden to carry. It is not your problem. In theory, if the government believes that the situation in your country is getting better, the government has to prove, yes, it's the government. Immigration, or if you're an immigration judge, it is the trial attorney representing immigration that has to prove that the situation in your country is getting better. So much better that it is now safe for you to return. So people from Venezuela say to me, well, that's just impossible, right? They're never going to prove it. I mean, it's been 20 years of Chavez and Maduro destroying not only the politicians, but destroying the education, the healthcare, the military. I mean, the judiciary is basically shot, as our own president has recently said. So how's the immigration going to win that argument that the situation in the home country is so good that they can go back? You would think it would be almost impossible. But here's the reality. The law is the government has to prove it. The reality is, when you go to an asylum interview or you go in front of an immigration judge, what they can just say is, you have not proven that you have a reasonable fear of going back. And they can stop it there. They can just say that. They say, nope, you haven't shown that you have a reasonable fear of going back. And by the way, that is because the situation in the country is much better. It's their way of possibly getting around the law. And so it's important to know what you're facing, what you're going up against. The reason this is called Giving Tuesday, though, is not just to talk about the law and the reality. It's called Giving Tuesday because we give information that is not legal advice to you directly, but may help you in your case, again, for you or your friends or your family who are applying for immigration benefits, in this case specifically asylum. What do you do if you're applying for asylum and the situation in your country is getting better? I would say there's two things that you really, really, really more than ever have to do if the situation in your country is getting better. First of all, be very, very careful with the evidence you're submitting in these cases, okay? Don't just take it for granted that you can walk in to an asylum interview or a court hearing and say, I'm from X country, and have the judge or the asylum officer say, oh, well, you're from that country, we're going to give you asylum. Understand you really have to prove with evidence, with documents, why you suffered past harm. And let me give you great examples that I've had from my clients. I will have, and hello, if you have a question from Asylum, we see you here and we will be taking your question. Feel free to type it in and we'll be answering it. So if something did happen to you when you were in your country, and again, for my Venezuelan clients, I know that some of them participated in marches and the National Guard may have thrown tear gas canisters at them, not on the ground as a way of letting the smoke come up and do some crowd control, but literally as a weapon from the top down. So here in Florida, at least, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, shooting something at someone that might kill them, might set them on fire, is sufficient harm for asylum, right? There's a case specifically about that. But don't think you can just go in and say, hey, I participated in this march, and look, here's what happened in this march, and of course you have to give me asylum. You're really going to need evidence. You're going to need people who were there with you. In a perfect world, you'll have some kind of photos to prove you were there, or some video. Not that videos are necessarily seen, but maybe you can take some screenshots of them. Something to prove you were at the march where these things occurred. Focus on your evidence, focus on your affidavits. It's going to be a long time before you get to your interviews. Make sure you have statements that are notarized, or if not notarized, maybe with the ID of the witness, indicating that you did suffer this harm. They will not be taking your word for it, okay? And the other thing is focus on history. I know this sounds kind of strange, right? Because sometimes people think, oh, all I have to do is tell my own story. Not in this situation. In this situation, if it's true that the situation of your country is improving, and again, I'll take Venezuela as an example, if it's true that the situation in your country is improving, you will hear questions being asked about why are you afraid to go back if, let's say, President Maduro is no longer president. Why are you afraid to go back? And the only way you're going to understand truly deep in your bones, other than to say, well, people are talking, is perhaps to look at history. There have been many countries, sadly, that have dictatorships where the leader of the country has left. They've either left willingly, right? They've gone into exile, or they've been killed. That doesn't mean that the situation of the country as a whole improves. So it's especially important to explain to an immigration officer or to an immigration judge that 20 years of affecting the government, the judiciary, the military, the education, the healthcare system, that all these things are affected. And history shows that just because the leader is removed, it doesn't mean that the harm is not there. I recently read a report, as an example, about how the healthcare system in Mexico is affected by international criminal organizations. For example, in Mexico, as in Venezuela, you need an ID card to be able to access the healthcare, right? Currently in Venezuela, if you are not part of the party in power, it's very difficult to get that ID card. So who knows what will happen if the president leaves. Just because the president leaves doesn't mean that people will suddenly perhaps have access to health care. It may be many, many years before someone has access to health care. And the fact that someone might die because they don't have access to health care, because they are not part of the ruling political party, well, some might consider that persecution, okay? So focus on your history and focus on the evidence that you have of any past harm. That would be my advice to you on today's Giving Tuesday. And if there's a person who has a question on asylum or on preparing their case specifically, feel free to bring it up. If not, it's not a matter of emailing on Giving Tuesday. It's a matter of actually putting your questions up on either Facebook or Instagram to get them answered. People who do want, however, a consultation personally, you do go ahead and request a consultation on our website, blandon-law.com. There's a little space there that says request consultation, and you can go ahead and try to book a consultation that way to discuss your private case. Again, this is just general information that we give out to people who are doing cases on their own because we hope that it helps you. Blandon Law, what we're all about is opening the door to your success. It's been a pleasure.